Welcome to Physical Hazards at My Job. Who are we and what we do here at Shermco? Before we get into physical hazards at my job site, it is imperative to understand the nature of our business, as there are inherent hazards that come with our business and the customers we serve. Here at Shermco, we hire top engineers and technicians in the industry. We are the largest motor shop in the Southwest. For Shermco, the focus is always safety, the industry leader in safety. And we do in-house oil testing and analytics, identify issues and receive corrective solutions. So, who do we service? It's anyone that has access to electricity, really. We service several major companies throughout the country, and we are continuing to grow internationally. We are one line, one company. So, what are the physical hazards in my workplace? For this presentation, we are going to discuss Shermco's primary physical hazards, most common incidents at Shermco, and after each one is discussed, we will look at the safety in place, what would what we could precautionarily take, we must do to prevent further incidents and near misses. Shermco primary physical hazards. For this presentation, we will be discussing these primary physical hazards: energized, combustible, chemical, heat, cold, and confined space. Energized hazards. It is important to understand the difference between electrical hazards and energized hazards. Although they carry some of the same characteristics, the motors and generators in which most of the work is performed is no longer connected to electricity, but some parts may maintain a full or partial charge. Copper windings in electrical cords for power are in fact an energized hazard as they maintain charge without electricity being present until dispensed in some form, at which point they are considered partially charged. Make no mistake, however, charged is charged, and in our business, either one can cause severe injury and even death. Prime example of such disbursement of energy comes in either electrical shock, which is electrocution, or arc flash. Electrical shock or electrocution. Amperage is the measure of current flow, and that's how many electrons flow through something per second. 1 amp is about 6 million trillion electrons per second. This flow of electrons is what actually causes the tissue or nervous system damage. All those electrons passing through the body either heat and burn tissue or interfere with essential electrical signals, such as those that cause the heart to beat. The latter phenomenon is why an electrocution above a certain amperage will cause your muscles to clench and make it impossible for a person to let go of a current source. Being physically unable to let go of a live wire is called tetanic contraction. Electrical safety measures. Here at Shermco, we live, excuse the pun, by a few key rules before testing. Education is available, and only specified or certified personnel are allowed to work on specific equipment. Every tech is issued their own lockout, tagout tags and locks with minimum secondary keys for security. Make sure you're always grounded. Test before touch. When in doubt, verify with another technician. Stop work card in place. If dangerous act is occurring, anyone can stop a job. So when we don't work safely, injuries and death can occur. Combustibles. In order for a fire or combustion to be present, you need a few things. You need a source for it to occur from. You need a resource or chemical reaction to feed it. When these two things are present, you have the potential for devastation. On the next slide is an example of what we might see here at Shermco. In this situation, a transformer is being shocked with hot wires. Due to the makeup of surrounding resources and continuous source of energy, fire breaks out and explosion occurs. Combustibles continued. Here at Shermco, we have many ways that a fire can ignite from combustible means. Via OSHA regulations and constant updates to the MSDS, we can control substances and situations. The use of regulatory standards for use and storage of chemicals in the workplace is vital in our role of safety, as there are many different types of both flammable gases and chemicals on site. Most common on site are flammable gases, such as oxygen, acetylene, and propane. Reactive ignition points also occur with welding, which uses electrical arcing to fuse metal. Acetylene. Acetylene is a chemical compound with the formula C2H2. It is a hydrocarbon and the simplest alkaline. This colorless gas is widely used as a fuel and a chemical building block. It is unstable in pure form, and thus it is usually handled as a solution. Propane is 3-carbon alkane with a molecular formula C3H8, a gas at standard temperature and pressure but compressible to a transportable liquid. Oxygen is a chemical element with the symbol O, atomic number 8. It is a member of the chalcogenide group on the periodic table and is a highly reactive non-metallic element and oxidizing agent that readily forms compounds with most elements. Welding is a fabrication or sculptural process that joins materials, usually metals or thermoplastics, by causing fusion, which is distinct from lower temperature metal joining techniques such as brazing or soldering, which do not melt the base metal. In addition to melting the base metal, a filler metal is often added to the joint to form a pool of molten material. This is called the weld pool. That cools to form the joint that can be strong as the base material. Pressure may also be used in conjunction with heat or by itself to produce a weld. Many different energy sources can be used for welding, including gas, flame, electric arc, a laser, electron beam, friction, and ultrasound. While often in industrial process, welding may be performed in many different environments, including in open air, underwater, and in outer space. Welding is a hazardous undertaking, and precautions are required to avoid burns, electric shock, vision damage, inhalation of poisonous gases and fumes, and exposure to intense ultraviolet radiation. Gases are regulated heavily by OSHA and covered under 1910 253A under the general requirements. In A1, flammable mixtures, which is a mixture of fuel and gases and air or oxygen, may be explosive and shall be guarded against. No device or attachment facilitating a permitting mixture of air and oxygen with flammable gases prior to consumption, except for the burner or in a standard torch, shall be allowed unless approved for the purpose. Here at Shermco, we store our containers specifically to fall within the codes of OSHA Regulation 1910-253 B5IIA and visibly distinguish them by color. The cylinders are always secured in upright position with a chained to eliminate accidental tipping, which might cause a break in the valve or puncture, resulting in what could be listed as a catastrophic event. All compressed gases are heavily audited, including valves, joints, and rot prevention through rust. These items in Shermco are access controlled through lockup, with only trained personnel having access through key checkout from their supervisor. Before a chemical, including gas, enters the facility, it used or exits the facility is identified, labeled, and must pass a pre-test safety check sheet and placed in storage, which is that of double containment. Acquisition of new chemicals and gases must be done through formal request sheet and must be accompanied by chain of custody log with each owner identifying hazards found through their audits prior to its acceptance into the facility. Protection. There is designated PPE throughout the facility to include that which is properly fit tested and designed for the individual using it. This protection is to ensure that the safe constraints are placed on protection of eyes, hands, arms, legs, feet, body, and head. In the event of emergency, the company has a sprinkler system as well as fire doors to assist in containment areas. Fire extinguishers, which are also audited monthly for charge and serviceability, are available and designated for the appropriate fire in which it were manufactured. As a Shermco employee, you may be subject to 4 kinds of chemicals which all affect the employee differently. They are ammonia, which is covered under policy E029, benzene under policy E030, H2S under policy E031, and lead under our policy E032. Workers in these areas are aware of the risk and work under direct supervision and appropriate PPE equipment for the job at hand. The uses or byproducts of manufacturing and creates these gases is monitored and exceeds OSHA standards for exposure limits. They also fall under Chemical Management Program, Chemical Request Program for proper dispersal to the employee. Shermco EHS policy manual conveys the necessary need and means of protecting against ammonia as part of the overall JHA. Section 1. Policy: all employees who have been identified as having a predetermined risk of occupational exposure to ammonia will be provided appropriate procedural precautions, training, and PPE. The purpose is to protect employees from occupational exposure to ammonia, and in the scope applies to all Shermco facilities and work sites. Color and state. Ammonia is non-flammable, colorless gas under normal conditions. It can be liquid under pressure. It's very soluble to water to form ammonia hydroxide. Some clients at Shermco may use or produce ammonia during their operations. It is a component of products derived from coal and petroleum and is found in gasoline and other fuels. Most produced ammonia is used as a fertilizer, but anhydrous ammonia is widely used in industrial refrigeration applications and hockey rinks. Ammonia is also used in the manufacture of plastic detergents, pesticides, and other chemicals. Employee exposure could occur anywhere where ammonia is produced or used. Ammonia is a hazardous gas. It is both caustic and hazardous. High concentrations of ammonia gas, liquid ammonia, or solutions of ammonia can cause harm if inhaled, or if they come into contact with eyes or skin. Ammonia is also a very pungent, suffocating odor. Even in low concentrating, inhaling it or getting the solution on the skin can cause burning, fainting, or possible death. Caution should be used when handling this chemical. High concentrations of ammonia gas, liquid ammonia, or solutions of ammonia can cause harm if inhaled or they come in contact with eyes or skin. The Occupational Safety Health Administration has set a 15-minute exposure limit for gaseous ammonia of 35 parts per million by volume in environmental air, and an 8-hour exposure limit of 25 parts per million by volume. The National Institute of Safety and Health recently reduced the IDLH, or the immediately dangerous to life and health levels, from 500 ammonia parts per million to 300 parts per million. The OSHA Regulation 1910-134B defines IDLH as an atmosphere that poses immediate threat to life, which would cause irreversible adverse health effects, or would impair an individual's ability to escape from a dangerous atmosphere. Ammonia vapor has a sharp, irritating, pungent odor that acts as a warning of potentially dangerous exposure. The average odor threshold is 5 parts per million, well below the danger or damage. Exposure of the eyes to ammonia may cause burning, tearing, temporary blindness, or severe eye damage. Exposure of all of the skin to ammonia may cause severe burns and blistering. Exposure of respiratory tract, mouth, nose, and throat to ammonia may cause runny nose, coughing, chest pain, severe breathing difficulties, severe burns, and even death. Training. Although ammonia is regulated in the United States as a non-flammable gas, it still meets the definition of material that is toxic by inhalation. SHRMCO employees who work in the vicinity of ammonia will be trained to avoid exposures to the chemical. This training will include, but not limited to, the contents of this policy, the federal OSHA standards and guidelines, proper PPE selection and use, care and inspection, and customer required precautions related to working around ammonia. SHRMCO employees will be provided with and be required to use impervious clothing, gloves, face shield, respirators, and other appropriate protective clothing necessary to prevent any possibility of skin contact with the liquid anhydrous ammonia or aqueous solutions of ammonia containing more than 10% by weight of ammonia. Similar precautions should be taken to prevent the skin from becoming frozen from contact with vessels containing liquid anhydrous ammonia. Employees will utilize the job hazard analysis to indicate the hazard of ammonia in their vicinities and to outline any safety contingency plans and provisions to be allowed. Site plan awareness. Employees must be informed where ammonia is used in the host facility and be aware of all plant safety rules and emergency contingency plans that apply. Crew leaders are responsible for obtaining the information prior to work commencing and for communicating it with the crew during the morning tailgate meeting. Benzene. All employees who have been identified as having to be predetermined risk of occupational exposure to benzene will be provided with appropriate procedural precautions, training, and personal protective equipment. Purpose is to protect employees from occupational exposure to benzene. This applies to all SHRMCO facilities and work sites. Benzene is a colorless liquid with a sweet odor. It evaporates into the air quickly and dissolves slightly in water. It is highly flammable and is formed from both natural processes and human activities. Some clients at SHRMCO may use or produce ammonia during their operations. It is a component of products derived from coal and petroleum and is found in gasoline and other fuels. Benzene is the same way. Benzene is used in the manufacture of plastics, detergents, pesticides, rubber, tire manufacturing, and storage or transport of benzene and petroleum products containing benzene. Employee exposure could occur anywhere benzene is produced or used. Exposure occurs mainly through breathing benzene vapors, but skin contact or the ingestion of water or fluids contaminated with benzene also can pose health problems too. Controls. Before an employee may go to a job where they may be exposed to benzene, a schedule for development and implementation of the engineering and work practice controls will be established. Exposure to benzene is controlled by limiting evaporation and preventing splashes and spills. Where exposure may occur, the preferred controls are engineering controls such as the use of hoods, canopies, and proper ventilation, coordinated with the use of personal protective equipment. A time period will be allowed for such engineering controls to be implemented before personnel are permitted to work in the vicinity. When engineering controls or work practices are being implemented and are not feasible, or in the event of emergency, respirators and similar personal protective equipment may be used. These plans will be reviewed and revised as appropriate based on the most recent exposure monitoring data to reflect the current status of the program as it pertains. Hazardous chemical. Benzene is considered a carcinogen by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Exposure limit. The Occupational Safety and Health Administration has set a 15-minute exposure limit for benzene of 1 part of benzene per million parts of air. That's 1 parts per million. As an 8-hour time-weighted average, or the short-term exposure limit of 5 parts per million for 15 minutes. The National Institute of Safety and Health recently reduced the IDLH levels to 500 parts per million. The OSHA Regulation 1910-134B defines IDLH as an atmosphere that poses an immediate threat to life, would cause irreversible or adverse health effects, or would impair an individual's ability to escape from a dangerous atmosphere. When exposures are expected to be over the PEL prior to mobilizing to the work area or site, SHRMCO will implement our written program to reduce or eliminate employee exposure to or below the PEL by means of engineering and work practice controls. Exposure effects. With exposure to benzene or from less than 5 years to more than 30 years, individuals have developed and died from leukemia. Long-term exposure may affect bone marrow and blood production. Short-term exposure to high levels of benzene can cause drowsiness, dizziness, unconsciousness, and even death. Training. SHRMCO employees who work in the vicinity of benzene will be provided with a written copy of this plan and trained to avoid exposure to this chemical. This training will include, but not limited to, the contents of this policy and federal OSHA standards and guidelines, proper PPE selection and use, care and inspection, and customer required precautions related to working around benzene. Personal protective equipment. SHRMCO employees will be provided and required to use appropriate respirators based upon the expected airborne concentrations of benzene and/or conditions of use. Respirator use will adhere to the Respiratory Protection Policy Section EO38 in the SHRMCO EHS Manual, which adheres to the OSHA 29 CFR 1910-134. All respirators utilized for benzene protection will be NIOSH approved. Where respiratory protection is not required but benzene exposure could occur due to accidental release or organic vapor gas mask or a self-contained breathing apparatus with a full face piece will be provided for use during escape. Personal protective clothing and equipment, i.e. chemical goggles, poly-coated Tyvek suits, etc., will be worn where appropriate to prevent eye contact, limit dermal exposure to liquid benzene. Protective clothing and equipment will be provided by SHRMCO at no cost to the employee. Hazard awareness. Employees will utilize job hazard analysis to indicate the hazard of benzene in their vicinities and to outline any safety contingency plans and provisions to be allowed. Site plan awareness. Employees must be informed where benzene is used in the host facility and be aware of all plant safety rules and emergency contingency plans that apply. Crew leaders are responsible for obtaining this information prior to work commencing and for communicating it with crews during the morning tailgate meeting. Another physical hazard here at SHRMCO is that of heat and that of cold. The physical hazards associated with the variable temperatures of heat and cold can be a vital part of our environment. Heat. Working in a hot environment can have effects on the body, some of them being adverse enough to cause severe injury. SHRMCO provided persons working in such conditions breathable wear that absorbs sweat in an effort to keep the employee cool. The shop is equipped with 7 rolling bays. During summer hours, these doors are open to allow ventilation, as it is not feasible to run an AC system throughout the entire facility without the need of monitoring air quality. The use of industrial fans helps circulate the air throughout the shop floor. During the winter, the shop gets cold, and overhead heaters are provided to eliminate cold exposure indoors. Field workers are rarely outside due to sophisticated computer equipment that monitors power and subsystems. When they are, however, they are dressed appropriately for work at hand within regulations and company policy. Life in the field is oftentimes less adverse than that in the shop in this manner. All employees are encouraged to take regular breaks and micro breaks to minimize exposure to any one element. Employees are also provided a regulated break room with refreshments free of charge to promote an environment where they feel taken care of. Oftentimes, promotion of morale can be the difference between focused production and mistake production that induces an incident. Confined space. Shermco has procedures for confined space. However, rarely is it considered to be subterranean. Prime example would be working in a wind turbine room some 200 feet in the air. Oftentimes, techs will work independently as to ensure the maximum amount of room to maneuver and prevent accidents from just being crowded. There are times we also use aerial lifts and cages to access or move equipment. The physical hazards in confined spaces are numerous. Proper PPE, such as a hard hat, restraints, or harnesses, are always available to our technicians and audited weekly as part of our safety management program. Shermco Incident Outlook. For the last 2 years, Shermco, there have been only two types of accidents reported. Electrical shock is the first one. As safe as we are, it's always back to basics when dealing with electrical equipment. This is the point in the process of procedures. No matter how smart we are always prone to incidents which could result in physical harm, property damage, and often both. Procedures are in place for step-by-step application to avoid such situations from happening. Majority of these incidents are deemed preventable if procedures were followed. To diminish these issues before they happen, we utilize trainings and JHA as well as self-audits when completing a task. Our techs literally call in to their supervisor between steps for job status, update, and knowledge check prior to continue work. The second type of incident that we have here at Shermco is a strain and tear. This kind of misfortune often occurs from overreaching as most of our work is large. Techs sometimes take shortcuts and try to reach over versus simply walking around. Our action was to install cameras on the shop floor to monitor these bad habits. Shermco is proud to be a VPP certified work site. Being OSHA VPP certified means that our commitment to safety is ongoing and our training for safety challenges the status quo by this elite designation. There are only 30 companies in the tri-state region with VPP designation. That's 30 out of over 100,000 companies. I would say that's pretty elite. It exemplifies our commitment to keep our employees safe and constantly improving our standards for safety. Our commitment to employees extends to their families. Our employees get the satisfaction of knowing we are looking out for their safety so they can return home to their families who also care about them.